Record. And we're recording now, and I'm going to finish up, we'll finish up Unit 4 on today's hearing aid fitting methods. And I think the last time, how we ended last time, I'll share screen. And where we ended last time was, I believe, on slide 40. And what I'll do is I'll start on slide 35, which is this guy right here. And what we're doing here is we'll just compare with the basic targets of several of the popular, more popular fitting methods out there. The NAL, NL1, as opposed to DSL4. Now, both of these, as you know, are earlier versions of today's fitting methods. These are the fitting methods that kind of fit between the fitting methods of yesterday, Berger, Pogo, Nal R, Libby, those old guys, which were meant for linear hearing aids. These are now meant for compression hearing aids, which is why they were called NAL, non-linear, version 1, compression, and DSL4. Now, you won't see DSL4 anymore, but I'll tell you a story about DSL4. It was the first DSL fitting method meant for compression. And what made compression fitting methods different from linear-based fitting methods is compression-based fitting methods offered more than one target, because compression gives different gain for different inputs, whereas linear gives the same gain for all inputs. So they tried to make the gain for linear fitting methods appropriate for inputs of average conversational speech. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're looking at one target of these compression-based fitting methods. Usually they offer 3 targets, one target for soft inputs, one for average, and one for loud. And we're looking at the target for average speech-like inputs. But always remember that there's more than one target. So, for example, see these plus signs here? That would be the targets for DSL4 for average inputs. The targets for DSL4 for soft inputs would be sitting below, and the targets for loud inputs would be sitting above. So basically, we're just looking at the middle. And what I did, this was when I was working at Unitron Hearing Aids. And we didn't have targets for NAL, NL1 really, not on the audio scan real ear. So I used the real ear system, and that real ear system only had DSL4 on it. It had the old methods and then DSL4. That was it. So I programmed a hearing aid, and I binked in this hearing loss, flat 60 dB loss, and then it showed up on the real ear system. And so normal hearing, 0 dBHL is MAP in SPL, minimal audible pressure. And then look at how the thresholds are exactly 60 dB above the normal hearing dashed line, just like these thresholds are exactly 60 dB below the 0 dBHL line. Okay, so here's your flat loss. I say, whoa, I say flat loss in quotes, but really in SPL, of course, it's a curve. Anyway, look at where the DSL4 targets are, right in the center, right in the middle. And that's the center of the dynamic range, right between the floor and the ceiling of loudness tolerance. Okay, so I programmed the digital hearing aid to match the targets, and that's the yellow dashed line. You can see that the outputs from that digital hearing aid nicely match to the targets. Okay, great. Then I programmed the hearing aid according to NAL, NL1. And then, okay, what's the hearing aid doing now? Well, here you go. Less in the lows, same in the mids, a little less in the highs. All right, well, that's for a flat loss. Sloping loss, okay, more common. Plotted in SPL, now it's going up. Loudness tolerance on the top. I first programmed the hearing aid to match the targets of DSL4. Yep, no problemo. Look at that, yellow line nicely hitting targets. Then I reprogrammed the hearing aid to fit NAL, NL1 targets, and now look where it fell. It was the same in the lows, Same in the mids. Well, the guy has hardly any hearing loss in the lows, so who cares? But the differences are found in the highs. And that's really an earmark, so to speak, of DSL's love affair, I should say NAL's love affair, with the cochlear dead spot concept. And NAL was in love with that particular thought. They said to themselves, selves, we're not going to aid where the hearing is the worst. We're going to aid the transitions, but we're not going to aid where the hearing loss is worst. So NAL-NL1 drops right off. It just throws in the towel. And that's for the flat loss, and that's for the sloping loss. If you go back to the flat loss, look at how it offers less in the lows as well. Not only a little less in the highs, but also less in the lows. Now that's because, and as we remember well, DSL tried to preserve the loudness relationship among adjacent speech frequencies. So this is what DSL tried to do. NAL did not. Okay? NAL did not try and preserve this loudness relationship. So NAL did not give as much low frequency gain. NAL says, hey, we don't care if vowels are normally heard louder than consonants. For hearing impaired, we're going to make sure that every adjacent speech frequency contributes evenly to the overall loudness of speech. And that is why NAL also then gives less low frequency in gain and output. And here's the cochlear dead spot concept. Remember this slide. The sloping loss in white, and then the more flatter loss in yellow. Boy, I'm having shades of deja vu. This is kind of like being at the MHS conference again, because this is exactly what I was talking about there. Anyway, and it's oddly enough, see the sloping loss, they want more low frequency gain and less highs because they've got cochlear dead areas here. So NAL offers less in the lows because of the loudness relationship of speech. They're not trying to preserve this. And NAL also offers less in the highs because of the cochlear dead spot concept. If you have no high frequency hair cells, then why the heck are you aiding them? So there you have it. And here you've got your NALR on the left showing one target, and NAL-NL1 showing 3 targets. And if you look at the middle target on NAL-NL1, look at the 65. That's almost identical to the one on the left. It's just that the one on the left continues all the way to the end, whereas the one in the middle here does not. But if you look at what the gain they are recommending across the frequencies, okay? At 1,000 hertz, 15. At 1,000 hertz, 15. At 2,000 hertz, 20. At 2,000 hertz, 20. At 3,000 hertz, 22. At 3,000 hertz, 22. At 4,000 hertz, 25. At 4,000 hertz, 25. See, so the target for average inputs didn't change. What did change was 2 things. Number 1, more than one target. And number 2, the targets end in thin air. And that is because of this cochlear dead spot concept here. Seewald put to death DSL-4, but for the sake of comparisons, we looked at some of these things. Okay, so here's the comparison between DSL-4 and NAL-NL1 for a flat loss, for a sloping loss. And now let's look at the DSL-5, okay, because Seewald killed DSL-4. And he realized, and a lot of people realized, that there was too much gain and output recommended by DSL-4. The preferred listening levels were less than that. And so they did a study among children, adult experienced, adult inexperienced, and all 3 groups wanted less. And so DSL-4 had to die. And then NAL-NL1 changed into NAL-NL2, and that you can see the differences here. NAL-NL1 is the hump in the middle. Once again, you've got 3 targets, one for soft, one for average, one for loud inputs, and NAL-NL2 is the dark lines, and you can see we're just visually looking at them. NL1 more in the mids, less in the lows, less in the highs. Even for a flat loss, the same thing. NL2 is in black, NL1 is in green, and once again, the mid-frequency emphasis of NL1 as opposed to the more low and high-frequency emphases of NL2. And hence the comparison, looking at NL1 versus DSL4, NL1 versus DSL4, and now DSL5 versus NL1. Now DSL5 had 2 versions, one for kids, one for adults. For children, it always wanted more because children are learning language and they need all the hearing they can get. DSL5 for adults is yellow. That's the one to concentrate on, because we as HISs are fitting adults. So look at NL1 in white and DSL5 in yellow. And when you do, you can see that NL1 is giving more output in the mids, less in the very lows, and similar in the highs for this flat 50 dB loss. If you look at a sloping loss now, again, the comparison between DSL5 and NL1, you can see once again, look at the yellow and the white lines mainly. Ignore the orange, that's for children. And once again, NL1 is asking for more in the mids and less in the highs. And look where its target ends. Ends at 4,000 again. Because the worst hearing is over here past 4,000. NL1 says, who cares? And then similar output is recommended for both. Well, the guy has no hearing loss in the lows, so who cares? But again, notice the diff. It's mostly in the mids, and that's because NL1 loved that mid-frequency amplification. Now let's look at NL1 versus NL2, okay, comparing the 2 Australian fitting methods. And NL1, much more mid-frequency amplification. NL2, less in the mids. Okay, similar in the lows because the guy doesn't have much hearing loss in the lows. And look at how the target for NL1 ends in thin air, whereas the target for NL2 goes all the way out again. That's because too many people complained about the targets ending in thin air. I remember working at Unitron when that was the case. People would phone up, how come the targets are ending up in thin air? And we'd always have to explain, NAL doesn't care about the worst parts of the hearing. But then the hearing aid manufacturers complained about it because they were trying to make software, fitting software. And if you didn't have any targets ending out past 4,000 hertz, they had difficulty programming their software to just roll things off. So there was a problem there. So NL2 reinstated the targets going all the way out to the end. That's something one should take note of because that is indeed a difference, okay? The other difference is NL2 tends to ask for a little more in the highs and very lows. Now, not in this particular case because the guy's hearing is pretty good in the lows. Let's look at a target comparison though now between DSL5 for adults and NL2. Okay, the main 2 players today. And when you look at this, you can see the sloping loss, you see the sloping loss, and basically DSL5 is asking for a little more across all frequencies. For a and the targets now go all the way out to 6,000 hertz, and basically they're quite similar. It's just that DSL5 is going to be asking for a little bit more than NL2. It's just, and I'm painting in broad strokes there. Now, if we take a look-see at our notes, how far have we come? Well, when you look at your notes, we've covered the DSL fitting method, DSL version 4, and you can see this highlighted right up here. Okay, and it brought about the SPLogram. That was DSL-4. It brought out plotting things in terms of output, not gain. Once again, that was DSL-4. So DSL-4 had a lot of really new things going for it, okay? Its only crime was that it was asking for too much gain and output. It was a bit of a power hog. But talk about an original method. They are the ones who changed real ear from yesterday's real ear to the speech mapping that we do today. You can give credit to of that to DSL-4. Its only crime, as I said, it was a bit of a power hog. Anyway, DSL-4 was very concerned with real ear to coupler difference. They brought that into the public arena. They brought in mic location effect, MLE. Let's say where the mic is for a CIC compared to where the mic is for a RIC, RIC. And the CIC mic is buried deep inside the concha bowl, which is going to add resonance between 5,000 and 6,000 hertz. You know, so DSL-4 was very careful. You know, it really looked at a bunch of things, and it was a real bit of a pioneering fitting method because it changed things. And DSL-4 offered more than one target because you're talking compression here, so there's a lot of stuff that it did. Then now 1 came out, and we talked about the differences between the two. I would put a star by this. Okay, this is the thing that makes NAL itself. This is their core philosophy. All now methods have this at their basis. Okay, they're not trying to preserve the loudness relationships among adjacent speech frequencies. Even though at the bottom of page 1, even though normal hearing people experience lows and vowels louder, vowels are louder, Nal says, who cares? The speech intelligibility, as I'm highlighting here, they said, is maximized when amplified adjacent speech frequencies are equally loud. And at the top of page 2, this is a main difference from DSL-4. Okay, so that's the thing you need to remember. The names to associate with Nal, the main one is Harvey Dillon. The other ones are all researchers along with Dillon. Thing to note to think about Nal 1 as well is this thing. Audibility versus effective audibility. These two things, audibility versus effective audibility. If you look at those two things, where are those highlighted? Well, I'll show you in the PowerPoint here. We'll go to the PowerPoint that actually talks a bit about that, okay? So let's go to here and move on up. Not here, go higher up, there. Audibility versus effective audibility. And you look at the white audiogram, these frequencies that I'm circling, okay, they might become audible if amplified to that person, but the person can't make much sense out of the amplified sound. So the effective audibility ain't much, okay? So you can make the sounds audible, but what use is the person going to be able to make of that audible sound? That's effective audibility. And that's what's highlighted in this slide here as well. So I've highlighted these two things. Looky, looky, there it is. Okay? The cochlear dead spot concept. If you've got so few hair cells in a high frequency region here, what use can the person make of the aided sound? So don't bother. Okay, Nal 1. And then we talked about summary comparisons between DSL-4 and NL1. And then we moved along and talked about DSL-5 and about the study done between the three groups of people. And so therefore, DSL overestimates preferred listening levels. All right, so basically DSL-5 backed off, Jack. They became weaker. DSL-5 is weaker than DSL-4. Then NAL 2 came out, and NAL 2 said, okay, the theoretical goal again was to maximize speech intelligibility while making overall loudness sound normal. But even NAL 2 said, you know what, NAL 1's a bit too much, especially in the mids. So what they're going to do is reduce some of the mid-frequency output. Like NAL 1, NAL 2 also looked at cochlear dead spots, but basically they said, you know something, we've got to just change our targets a little bit. Here it is. Instead of targets ending in thin air, NAL 2 gently rolls off the targets so they go very, very all the way out. Okay, so basically NAL 2 offers a little bit more amplification in the lows and very highs and less in the mids. And then you've got these guys. Now look at your manufacturer proprietary methods. Look what I'm highlighting there. Manufacturer proprietary fitting methods should generally be avoided. You will see them on the software, but try not to go with those. They tend to be weaker than DSL-5 and weaker than NAL2, NL2. They roll off high frequencies like crazy. Usually proprietary fitting methods are fairly brutal methods. They're really not that good. They tend to roll off the high frequencies especially. The software might indicate that you're way on target, but real ear verification can show that you are way off. Now the blame can be put anywhere, but really the onus is on clinicians to verify with real ear. Here's what I always think is funny. The last 3 lines. Today's fitting software is so psychosocially focused. I mean, look at the line here. If you have any trouble hearing the preacher every second Sunday at a 33-degree angle at 33 feet distance, push this button. And we don't really always know what happened. I think it's almost humorous. Well, let's look at what happens when you don't do real ear. And we'll just take a look at that's how we finish this unit. So we move on over to here. That's why I showed this picture of a guy throwing knives at this person standing in front of the targets there. There she is, okay? The fact is, different manufacturers' first fits can vary by 30 dB for the same hearing loss, and the fitting software no way ensures audibility. The best way to ensure audibility is to utilize digital instrument fitting equipment like the AudioScan VeriFit. That's a real ear system. You never have to wonder because you can literally see what the client is hearing. Too often we let the software do the walking and the talking, and we don't always verify with objective measures, is the hearing aid doing what we think it's doing? So look at the left. Here you're seeing 3 targets, and it looks like the software is right on cue. You've got 3 targets, one for soft inputs, average inputs, loud inputs. You got 3 output targets. And now it looks like the hearing aid. Here's the frequency response of the hearing aid, the thin lines. It looks like you're programming the hearing aid, and it looks like it's pretty well close to target. However, when you verify with real ear, let's just pick on the middle one, the ones around 60. Let's look at this guy right here. Well, when you do, okay, here's the normal hearing. Here's the hearing loss going up for it's a real precipitous high frequency hearing loss. Here's loudness tolerance levels, the asterisks. Here's DSL-4 targets, which is too much, admittedly. Even DSL-5 would admit that. But the thing to look at here is this. While the software on the left said you were pretty close to DSL-4 targets because you were using the software, and we chose DSL-4 on the software, in reality, look at how far you were short of the plus sign. not 4 dB, not 14 dB, something like 40 dB. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is why you verify with Real Ear. Real Ear measurement, yeah.
When you're doing the Real Ear measurements, are you able to put into the system if you're using the Now 2 or the DSL5, or
yes.
does it
automatically? Nope, you choose. Thank you for asking, because when you bink in the audiogram, you take it from NOAA, you put it into the Real Ear system, and then you choose what's your fitting method. DSL5, NAL 2, NAL 1, take your pick. And once you picked your fitting method, then you hit enter, and there come your targets. You can see it. And then you run the hearing aid, and you've programmed it for DSL5 or NAL 2 or NAL 1. So you program the hearing aid according to one of the fitting methods. Then you go on to Real Ear, and you choose that fitting method, and then you verify, is the hearing aid actually truly programmed to deliver? So you're matching targets as seen on Real Ear, and usually on the software, it looks pretty good. And so this on the software on the left, I might have chosen DSL4. And it says, okay, with the hearing loss and DSL4, it looks pretty good. Okay, now let's prove it. I take the Real Ear system, enter the audiogram, enter DSL4, and look at this. This is not as rosy a picture as this. And that's the point here. See?
Are you able to verify whenever you're using the proprietary software?
You can too, yes. But the Real Ear system will not have the proprietary methods on it. The only system that has the proprietary fitting methods, of course, is the software. So I'll rephrase my answer to that question. No, you can't really verify, but here's what you can do. In other words, I'll stop sharing for a second because you're asking a good question. I can program the hearing aid with the proprietary fitting method, but when I go on to Real Ear, I won't see the choice of choosing that proprietary fitting method, but who cares? I can run the hearing aid anyway, and you'll see what it's actually delivering. And you'll look at it and go, oh my God, I'm hardly getting anything, especially in the highs. So yes, you can look at any fitting with Real Ear. It's just that Real Ear will have DSL4, it'll have DSL5, it'll have NAL 1, it'll have NAL 2, okay?
Are there instances where we're still fitting NAL 1 and DSL4?
There are instances where we're fitting NAL 1, but no longer DSL4. It's really kind of like NAL 1, NAL 2, and DSL5.
Okay.
And the biggest
people will come in though with that
yep.
already programmed into it.
Yep.
Did you reprogram it at that point to the DSL5 or to NAL 2 if it's better?
Yeah, you can. That's your choice. Is a person coming in and says, they're interested in some changes? Absolutely. The hearing aid may be programmed to NAL 1, and you can say, hey, let's reprogram the hearing aid. Let's see what it's doing on NAL 2. Let's program it according to that one. So, yep, a lot of people do that. So it's your choice. This is where the art of being a clinician comes into play. So yeah, great. That's very, very true. I'll share a screen here and we'll look at the PowerPoint here. The beauty of Real Ear is it allows you to objectively see what's happening. Ear mold changes, hearing aid settings, and as Tina said, changing the fitting formula. You can see the difference. The beauty of Real Ear is it allows you to see what the client is hearing. And you no longer have to sit there relying on subjective verbal reports. So sounds okay or it's tinny. You can actually see what's going down, which is really cool. And here's a point too. Hitting the targets isn't necessarily what you always need to do, especially if a person's a new hearing aid wearer. You may want to actually underfit on purpose, and then later on boosts things up when the person gets used to aided sound a little more. But here's what I say in the very middle sentence: right, wrong, or indifferent, Real Ear measurement allows you to see what the client is hearing. I mean, how does that sound? Goes only so far. So you may want to not necessarily, that's why I say before anyone freaks out, okay, don't have a freak out pill, okay, just take a pill, I'm going to say. The nice thing about Real Ear is you can deliberately underfit, and you can write in the file, I did this on purpose, you know, and later on, this is what I'm going to do. So here's common objections to using Real Ear measurement, as espoused by a good friend of mine, Adam Perry. This is a hoot. Equipment's too expensive. Well, it actually starts around $3,000. I don't have to. Look closely at your bylaws. It's rapidly becoming preferred practice. Audiologists don't have to. Imagine offering better services than them. I prefer to use client satisfaction scales. How this trumps objective measurement is beyond me. Why should I? My competition doesn't. God forbid you do better than they do. I listen to my clients. I'm so darn good I don't need Real Ear measurement. REM is a waste of time. Actually, it gives a lot of info in about 12 minutes time. Manufacturer software already does the work. See the rest of this presentation. Watch. Here's students of mine at Conestoga College in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. The nice thing about having students is you have slaves. No, I'm just teasing. But then you get them to do some work for you, and you call it homework, which is great. We had a student, initials GH, and what she did was she programmed a hearing aid on software from a hearing aid manufacturer to fit with DSL-4. And then she programmed the hearing aid to fit according to NAL 1. So DSL-4 on the left, NAL 1 on the right. And the person's audiogram is plotted in red. And you can see normal hearing at the bottom of your screen, MAP, 0 dBA, HL, but here it is. Here's the client's hearing loss. Here's loudness discomfort levels. And here's the DSL-4 targets as the plus signs. Now, we programmed the hearing aid on the software, the manufacturer fitting software, according to DSL-4. We chose DSL-4, plotted it, or programmed, and the software said, yep, you're right on target, looks good. We moved the hearing aid over to Real Ear, binked in the audiogram on the Real Ear system, chose DSL-4, and said, okay, hearing aid, deliver. Let's see what you're getting. And in all actuality, what we were getting was the brown. Look at how far below target we were. We had to reprogram the hearing aid to make it more closely match target. Then we programmed the hearing aid on the manufacturer software to hit NAL 1. And it looked rosy groovy on the software. Moved it over to Real Ear. You're below target. Look what we had to do to match the target. Look at the next student. This student, we said, program the hearing aid according to NAL R, the old version of NAL. Okay, so look at the screen carefully. Here's your target, the red arrows pointing at the target. This is old Real Ear now. Remember, this is not mapping. This is today's Real Ear. We're looking at old Real Ear here, but who cares? The main point is this. Real Ear unaided response, Real Ear aided response, REAR minus REUR gives you Real Ear insertion gain. Look at this. You're way below target. Look what we had to do after readjusting so that we would better hit target. Another student programming a Resound Verso 761 mini receiver in the ear. Okay, first fit according to NAL 1. Now you're back at speech mapping again. And on the software, it looked rosy, rose-colored glasses. Moved it over to Real Ear. You're below targets here. Have to reprogram it to better match the targets. Another case with a Siemens Pure My M receiver in canal. According to NAL 1, it looked good on the software. You binked in the audiogram, chose the NAL 1 fitting method. hit return, saved, okay? Take the hearing aid off, put it on real ear, bink the audiogram into real ear, choose now 1, deliver, under target again. Have to readjust to make it match target. It's almost always like that. Anyway, today's DSL-5 or NL2, that's the main 2 players in 2018, okay? Basically, you'll see 3 different inputs. One input at 65, which is the average input. That's the most important. And what you want to do, read the sentence here. Try to make sure that the aided outputs are about a third above the threshold. And I repeat, not in the middle of the dynamic range. I will highlight what I mean here. DSL-4 plots things to be in the middle of the dynamic range. Look at the targets for DSL-4. In the middle, 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 okay? And you can see other examples of that too. I mean, DSL-4 is a bit of a power hog. Look at this picture. Targets in the middle, in the middle, in the middle, okay? Today, we no longer do that. Today, you want the target output for average inputs to be sitting about a third above the bottom or a third above the thresholds. Looking at it, and we'll learn more about this after spring break when we delve directly into real ear measurement, because the first half of this course is completed today, okay? And then we've got our spring break and we come back and we'll delve directly into real ear measurement itself. But we're just giving a bit of a preview here. So looking at average inputs, 65, because average speech is between 60 and 70 dB/SPL. So your average input, 65. What's average speech in dB/HL? Between 50 and 60. What's an average MCL when you're doing a hearing test? Around 50, 55, 60. Okay, so average speech inputs are about 55 HL, 65 SPL, and the goal is make sure your aided outputs with average speech inputs are about a third above the threshold, not directly halfway. That would be DSL-4. That's too much. Then your second input, try soft speech input, 55 dB SPL. And now your aided outputs should barely be above the thresholds. About half of the outputs should be above threshold. In other words, excuse me, your aided outputs should be barely above your thresholds, because normal hearing people can barely hear soft speech. So why should hearing aid person have it any different? Now, thirdly, maximum power output, that's about 85 dB/SPL inputs, and make sure that all the outputs are below the asterisks, below your loudness discomfort levels. I don't tend to use live voice except just as a show me trick, you know, just as something to show, to keep the spouse involved, if he or she wants to talk and see what the aided outputs are. But the loved one's speech is not calibrated, so I usually let the real ear equipment handle it. But probe tube measures and fitting methods, it's mainly NAL or DSL, and this is a typo, it should be NAL2 or DSL-5. Manufacturers also have proprietary fitting methods. These tend to roll off the highs. Software almost always overestimates the inputs. Almost always overestimates. Almost always paints a rosier picture. Real ear almost always shows less than what was predicted. So let's finish this talk today. Let's look at a couple of practice slides right here. Here is a real ear system. And what we'll do is I'll just show this picture here and we'll explain the pieces and parts. And then I'll ask questions here. So here we go. Normal hearing is on the bottom. In dB/SPL, there's a minimal audible pressure, MAP. Here's a flat hearing loss, Okay, the asterisks are the loudness discomfort levels. So the red O's are the person's thresholds, loudness discomfort levels. You can see how his dynamic range is half of what's normal. Now look at the green. The green is unaided speech. So I can see that unaided speech is literally below the guy's thresholds. I can't see it. It's below threshold. So that means that the guy can't hear anything. Okay, he might hear a little bit right here. Okay, so that's average speech inputs. Now we put the hearing aid on his ear. And now look at my aided speech outputs. And here's the question in white. Is this a good fit? Yes or no? Why or why not? And when we look at this, well, where is aided speech plotted? It looks like it's sitting halfway in the guy's dynamic range. It's halfway. That's a little bit too much. Okay, that's like DSL-4. That's what DSL-4 would do. And DSL-4 was thrown into the garbage. We don't do that anymore. It's too much. So no, this is not a good fit for average speech inputs because the aided outputs are sitting in the middle of the guy's dynamic range. But let's read the slide together. It's a speech map. And on the top, instrument, BTE, doing real ear, single view, showing the graph, looking at the scale. It's plotted in dBSPL. Age, adult. Transducer, what hearing aids were used. What headphones, inserts. They're choosing average UCLs, average real ear to coupler difference. Binaural threshold, just leaving it alone. And here you're looking at it. The speech input 65, speech input 65. Green is unaided, pink is aided. Okay, and it's a little much. Let's look at this one. Here's another case, okay? Is this a good fit for an average speech input of 65 dBSPL? Again, why or why not? Well, here's the audiogram going up. Here's unaided speech, the light gray. You can see that unaided, this person hears the vowels, but can't hear the high frequency consonants. So your job is to lift this unaided speech to where it belongs. Okay, so unaided speech in the light blue, aided speech in the purple. Is this a good fit for average speech inputs? Well, where is the output sitting here? Looks like to me an awful lot like it's once again sitting in the middle of the guy's dynamic range. It's a bit much. The person will likely reject the hearing aid fitting. It has the same crime as this one. Okay, same thing. Now let's look at this. For what speech input might this be a good fit? And when you're looking at this, well, what do you think? Look at the fit. Where is speech sitting? It's sitting right around the guy's hearing levels. It's sitting right around his thresholds. So if this is the aided output, if the green is the aided output, for what speech input is this a good fit? And the answer would be for soft inputs, because the aided output is barely above the guy's hearing levels. And if normal hearing people can barely hear soft speech, why should an aided person hear any different? So this is a good fit for soft inputs because the aided output is hugging the thresholds. It's right on the thresholds. Now you're looking at another case here. So what we did was we kept this mean here. Look at the mean, the dark line here. Let's keep that, okay? And now we're looking at more stuff. So now we've got the output for soft inputs in green, and what we've taken away is the range, okay? We're just looking at the mean here. And now we're looking at the pink. And it's like, okay, for what might this be a good fitting? Well, when you're looking at the pink, look where the aided output is. about a third above the threshold. A third, not half, a third. Unlike this, it's about a third, and that's good. That means the guy can hear all of average speech. It's all there. From Matthew to Mark to Luke to John, it's all there. In other words, to concentrate, the 4 frequencies you need to concentrate on are 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000. Make sure that with average speech inputs of 65 dB, make sure that the aided outputs at 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 are all about a third above threshold. In other words, if I take you back to this slide here, we're not worried about what's happening at 8,000. We're not worried about what's happening at 125. We're concentrating on the middle, albeit this middle is raised up too high. It's halfway in the guy's dynamic range, so that's too much. But again, here, it's a little bit too much. It's halfway above the guy's thresholds. But the main point is, if this is for soft speech inputs, the purple or pink here is a good aided output for average speech inputs. And then look at the light blue line. That might be the aided outputs for loud inputs. And they're all below the asterisks except this one right here. I would try and lower the gain there, or the output there. That's a bit much. But other than that, this is a pretty good fitting, because I've got the, I'm doing what I ought to do for soft, average, and loud inputs. They're all being mapped into the person's dynamic range. And that's what they mean by speech mapping. I am mapping the speech. I can see what the client is hearing for soft inputs, average inputs, and loud inputs. Now, what's going on here? Look at this thing. Okay, this can't be unaided speech, because unaided speech goes down. If I look at this here to show you, here's unaided speech. Vowels are louder than consonants, okay? What's happening here is I'm simply not getting enough output. Whatever the input is, this guy can't hear it. It's below his thresholds. So when we just look at some of these cases here, this is good practice to find out what the heck is going on. But the real thing about real ear is, you know, basically, and this is one of the last slides I showed at the MHS conference, okay? Are fitting methods becoming islands in the setting sun? I mean, honestly, if you are mapping speech properly, as is shown on this slide, essentially, that's what all fitting methods were trying to do. They wanted this. They wanted this result. From half gain rule to Berger to Pogo to Libby to now. DSL, now 1. Now to what they're all seeking, even though they have different philosophies, what they're all seeking is to make sure that soft speech is barely audible, loud speech is comfortable, I should say average speech is comfortable, and loud speech ain't too loud. And they're trying to map it into the dynamic range. And if you can do this, who needs fitting methods? Because that's what they're trying to do. You see, fitting methods were invented largely before there was real ear. And now that there's real ear, and that's why I said at the MHS conference, Liebarger would have given his eye teeth to be able to see what the client hears. But he didn't have the instrumentation. That's why he came up with rules. I'm going to give half gain. Okay, because if I give half gain, that means the output for average inputs will sit nicely in the guy's dynamic range. That's what I believe. That's what I hope will happen. That's what I think will happen. But he couldn't really prove it. You know, all he could do was functional gain. Let's improve the guy's thresholds by half. If I do that, then the hoped for end result will be blah, 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 blah. So basically, that's why we go through a history of hearing aid fitting methods, because it shows that they're converging back to where everything began. In the beginning was functional gain. Real ear measures did not exist. All hearing aids were linear. So I will just stop sharing because that takes us all the way to the end of our coverage of fitting methods. So in this course so far, we covered non-electronic acoustic modifications where we reviewed vents, filters, horns, and then we went into ANSI measurements and we reviewed OSPL 90, full-on gain, reference test gain, equivalent input noise, and total harmonic distortion. Then we moved on to Unit 3 and we looked at early fitting methods. Then we went into Unit 4 and we completed our coverage of today's fitting method. Now we're ready to look at real ear measurement by itself, and we'll look next time in Unit 5, we'll look at old real ear as it used to fit with old fitting methods, and then we'll move to today's real ear and we'll cover more of the how-tos, more of the real ear, looking at things more from a real ear perspective instead of from a fitting method perspective. There we have it. Any questions?
We have quiz 4 due and a midterm this week.
You know what? The best person to ask that is Lynn Royer, serious as a heart attack. I'm just a guy who lives in a van down by the river. You know what? I have to grade them, but she's got a better handle on the chronology and the due dates. Way better. I would email Lynn and ask her because she's going to know. If I told you something, I'd be making it up and I'd be telling you a lie. The truth is, TDK, Teddy doesn't know.
Okay.
No worries. You asked some good questions there, Tina, in the middle. I'm really glad you did, because those are very important questions that I may take for granted that people know and actually the person might be thinking otherwise. So thanks for asking those questions because it's good.
Sure.
All right. So I guess we'll see you in 2 weeks. I guess the next week is spring break. There's no classes on my end. I will not be holding a Zoom session next week, Tuesday. So, but I'll talk to you in 2 weeks and we'll pick up our coverage of real ear per se. Okay?
Okay.
Cool. All right.
Bye.
See you later. I'll stop recording and get some lunch.